to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to our regular meeting of the Board of Trustees, our special meeting, excuse me. Just so everyone knows that this is being broadcast on YouTube, so images and sounds from the participants will be captured there. Okay, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Mohammed here with us.
Just jump right into it, huh?
I think so.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me as I wrap up my work, working with your district. It's been quite a pleasure. As you know, I had a friendship with Dr. Derby, who's no longer here, but Dr. Smith has been a pleasure to work with and transition, and I can see the benefit of both of their leadership styles and what's been able to be done here in Novato. This is the last executive summary, and to give folks some background who weren't here before, about how we got to this point. In 2021, I did a series of school equity audits at all of the schools in Novato. And those are, I believe, public record, and they can get access to those. And in the executive summary, it kind of explains what an equity audit is, the methodology used, the data collection. And I want to kind of start with establishing, for those who are new to this, what we mean by equity, because that became a subject of discussion at a couple of the other previous board summaries. There's a difference between equity work and social justice work. Now, in a perfect world, they converge. But equity work, when we think of equity, it means ensuring that every child in Novato is getting the services that they need to meet the goals and objectives of Novato USD. Literacy, numeracy, fair jurisprudence, feel safe and secure. You should not be able to predict a student's experience in a system that's committed to equity based upon that student's ethnicity or gender or sexual orientation. So equity really isn't real emotional work. It's actually looking at evidence of students and student groups compared to others and their experience here in the district. Social justice work is advocacy on behalf of groups who have been traditionally marginalized, and it includes protest. It includes awareness in certain issues. And both types of work are very important work, but I wanted to clarify the social justice work isn't a part of my job here at Novato. I would certainly encourage those in the community who are big advocates of social justice work to continue that, because democracy really only works well when all voices are heard. As we saw with the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, when people who are marginalized are silenced and aren't allowed to give their input in society, then people suffer. But I wanted to clarify that that wasn't my specific work. Now, I have a social justice agenda as a person, but I'm here representing an academic and a professional and looking at evidence against very concrete standards. How are kids doing in your district as it relates to what you expect of every student? So, in the beginning of the executive summary, I summarize what that audit is, what it entails, and the research that it comes from. A book that I wrote called Overcoming the Achievement Gap Trap, which is actually a required read at the Harvard Urban Superintendent's PhD program, is an analysis, it's a lens to look at equity. And there's other lenses. Glenn Singleton, who is close to you guys, works on courageous conversations about race. He has a lens. There are other people who do equity work. One of my colleagues, Mohammed Khalifa, has a framework for equity around leadership. This is more of a systemic school view. So it explains how I reached the data points and the conclusions that I reached. The second phase, after the audits were done, was to come and work with schools individually to coach them on how to make progress from the feedback that they had received from the equity audits. So what I've done since it's my last time with you guys, I finish up. I have 2 more schools to go to, and I want to say, give a shout out to Olive today. Great session today. Ms. Nono should be commended on the work that we actually have 3 great principals. At all 3 of the schools present, I had great experiences with their leadership teams present. You have some really good things going on in a lot of schools here in Novato. So I wanted to shout out the principals who had a really fulfilling day at Olive today. I'm really proud of the work that you guys are doing. So I wanted to say that in front of the board, in front of the community. So you give my hand. And I have a couple more schools to work with Hill tomorrow and 1 more school on Friday. But I wanted to start with my original recommendations, an analysis, and an update on where you are. Now we're looking back 3 years. What's been done based upon what I recommended 3 years ago. So, first recommendation, if you go to page 2, was to, one of the things I was really surprised by as I work with each school and did the audit, and then did the presentation to the staff, was how surprised many people were by some of the disparities. Like the fact there's only 1 Latino girl in the entire algebra program. Like, that shouldn't be shocking. So one of the things that I recommended was that the schools incorporate more data-driven decision-making and really make its change initiatives focus on where the evidence took us. Now, there were schools that were engaged in restorative justice. There were other things being done, but as I asked, what was the motivation from an evidence-based standpoint that this was necessary? There were some schools that had equity teams. When we came in, they were doing assessments of cultural representation in visuals, etc. And that's not a bad thing. But my question was, what was the evidence that motivated you to do that? And often I wouldn't get any answer at all. So I recommended that the schools take the audit and create a data protocol and really start to pinpoint through their data protocol where specifically our equity issues are. Could it be boys at Hamilton who are disproportionately assigned to special ed? At Novato High, could it be interactions with campus resource officers with African American males? I wanted every school to get kind of inundate themselves in focusing their improvement efforts from an equity standpoint on where their data showed the biggest needs were. So if you go to page 3, I give you a current reality and update from doing interact with most of the schools in coaching, and I am proud to say that that has improved. Universally, there's still some growth to be made. There are some schools that are doing a great data-driven decision-making job, and others who still are in the beginning phase of making data-driven decisions. But overall, it's much better from a district perspective in 2024 than what I witnessed in 2021. And honestly, the connection to the schools who are really doing a great job on it is directly reflected on their school leadership. Where the school leadership focuses on data, there's teachers and their leadership teams tend to have greater data literacy and more of a focus on specifically what needs to be done. So universally, though it's not exemplary yet, it's trending in the right direction. And part of what I recommended in the original recommendation is that the Board of Education, I know some of you are new to the board since I came in 2021, is to require each school to give you an equity goal for the year. And then produce a platform once a year, because they're doing a lot of other things too. And equity is not an initiative. Equity is a lens. It's how you go about analyzing your work to make sure that we're not underserving some kids while perhaps overserving or favoring others. I don't think that's too big of an imposition that once a year they articulate their goal We want to reduce the number of new IEPs for Latino boys at the elementary level, and then give you an update once a year on how that's going. That was a recommendation I made 3 years ago that still hasn't come to fruition as a policy in 2024. So I'm kind of putting that back on your plate to pick that back up. And if the schools are doing it, it shouldn't be an additional burden. It's just articulating to the board in good faith, here was our focus, here's why, here's the progress that we've made, here are the challenges that we still have. And if I'm a parent of a young man of color, who your data has shown is more likely to end up with an IEP, I would feel more endeared to the district if you were monitoring that and making active plans to make sure that my child doesn't get singled out if he doesn't have a disability because he's misunderstood. So that's the first one. Any questions on that before I go to the second? All right, second was professional development. In the audits, what was a consensus is that your teachers did not have a level of apathy around where kids were struggling, but there was an apparent skill gap, particularly around English learners. Most educators, unless you get an English learner endorsement, have to kind of learn on the job how to respond to kids who are emerging bilinguals. They need support. And one of the most, in the data, if you get a chance to go back and look at the audits, one of the most prominent issues in both the surveys and the interviews, which were part of the audit process, is that we want to help English learners, we just don't know how. And if you leave it up just to ELD teachers, good luck. Language acquisition needs to be a team sport, and it's kind of unfair to have the ELD teachers to do it all by themselves. So if you go to recommendations on page 4, part of my recommendation is to connect prominent equity issues that are at a macro level in the district and align your professional development with the most critical issues. Now, in my dialogue with Dr. Derby and also with Dr. Smith, understand through budget cuts and contract negotiations that the traditional PD days have been compromised. But what I want to share in my kind of new recommendation is that don't view professional learning through an event and professional development days. In a very progressive school, there should be professional learning that goes on all the time, whether it's PLC time, whether it's a staff meeting, whether it's the utilization of streaming video. You can't wish away skill gaps. And I'll give an example from my experience. I was a middle school teacher for 8 years, and one of the biggest challenges I had is that in year 3, I was thrust into a co-teaching situation with a special ed teacher with no special ed experience, no understanding of co-teaching, and I found myself very overwhelmed. I took it upon myself to seek some PD, to seek some support, actually work with some other teachers who are already doing co-teaching because I just wanted to do it. But I don't think that's a good, standard policy, that we leave it up to the altruistic desire of every teacher to go find it on their own. I think you can be much more strategic. So I'm recommending in my update that the battle for PD days, it is what it is. You only have 180 school days. You have contract negotiations. You only have so much money. I'm recommending you get more creative in your PD. And your data will guide you on where that needs to be. Obviously, English learner is a big one. Special education, culturally responsive teaching. To expect teachers to be able to engage in the practices that will produce greater equity without the direct training and support they need to do it is a pipe dream. And you're probably not going to get it with one district PD day a year. I put in the report, I got 1 day in 3 years, full day with your teachers. That was January 2023, to go over with half the district the framework for overcoming the achievement gap trap, but that's not adequate long term to really inundate teachers in what they need. So that is still a gaping area of need that hasn't really been strategically addressed yet. But I'm advising Dr. Smith and her team to not just lean heavily on PD days, but to get creative. And we even talked about at Olive today, ways to use staff meetings or other opportunities for teacher engagement and development, because teachers can only do what they know. Any questions on that one? All right, let's transition to number 3. Number 3, a part of the need for me to come and do equity audits came from some very vocal and demanding community members, and my response to them is good for you. That they pushed against the system to get the system to at least hear their grievances. Part of what I discovered when I did these audits is that the gap between those in the community who wanted a greater focus on equity in the district wasn't that they were speaking differently, they just never talked. And in recommending that every school create an equity team, my recommendation was that a community member or two be in those equity teams to create a better communication system between the buzz in the community around equity and what was going on at the campus level. I haven't seen a team do it yet, and let me backtrack for a minute. In most of the schools, the equity team was dissolved because last year, for any new board members, there were a lot of different teams. My recommendation last year was you need fewer teams. There were so many task forces and teams that it was just, you couldn't see the forest for the trees. So it's not unusual you don't have any parents or community members because you don't have an equity team anymore. But equity work should be interwoven into the teams that you have. So I met with the ILT this afternoon at Olive. In a structure like that, there's a space for a community member or a parent to be a part of that so that you're not, I was concerned that there was some tone deafness between both groups. What the educators saw as professionals and what the parents and community members saw, and that needs to be united. They shouldn't be at odds with each other. There needs to be that, and that really hadn't happened yet. But one thing I will add about the equity efforts with parents and the community is that some of the rhetoric that we experienced during and immediately after COVID, if you go to page 6, some of that is kind of taken care of itself. I don't know if you all remember, it seems like ancient history, the debates about mask on, mask off. A lot of the debates about, woke and what's not woke or sleep or whatever they call it, a lot of that is kind of died down. I think it's kind of died kind of a natural death. I think we were kind of, the evidence showed we were really uptight during COVID. Locked in our homes, unsure, and people were just kind of grumpy. As I told the board after I did my first audit, I got a lot of weird emails and calls from Novato citizens. One wanted my transcript. One wanted to know was I going to teach kids Sharia law. Because my last name is Muhammad. I am proud to announce I haven't gotten any weird racist or Islamophobic emails from Novato citizens. Yay. No, I'm not teaching you Sharia law. I'm not going to make your kids go through Ramadan. But so some of those needs I'm reporting aren't as prevalent in 2024 as they were in 2020. It was a tinderbox back then. And I'm sure you probably had some knockdown dragouts at the board meeting, board members getting threats, and you're not going to make my kid wear a mask, and you're not going to expose my kid to, talking about gender identity and all. I think that's kind of found this middle ground. Is that a fair assessment? I found it nationally, but has that been kind of the case here? Not quite as prevalent? Okay. So that one is still important, but not as important as it was in 2021. Let's go to 4. Policy review. What I found in the audit is that there were some wonky policies that were producing some of your equity gaps. I want to address a few and kind of lay my recommendations on you. It started with, originally, the requirements to get into the STEM program at San Marin. I am proud to announce when I work with San Marin, they were working on specific policies and addressing. I have to give them their props. They were actively working on that. But another couple, one was your gifted program. Now, this has been a topic at every leadership team I work with. And what I encourage the board to do is, as you stand on policy, be prepared for blowback. Because when you start to create more equitable policies, you start stepping on privilege. And the message you want to send is, because we're opening up the opportunities for others through policy, doesn't mean we're taking something from your child. So, number one, do you even have a standard criteria for what gifted actually means? If you're using an assessment to identify giftedness, what is the validity of that assessment? I asked the question today, if you have a gifted assessment you're using and the cut score is 50, is using a standard number. What if I get 49? Am I ungifted because I was 1 point below the cut score? Those are policy decisions. And now this kid gets shut out of an opportunity because of a test that everything can't be totally empirical. Everything is not always accurately measured. So when it comes to things like that, we had a discussion today. What's happening in gifted that's different than the regular ed classroom? And one of the responses was more project-based learning and more intrinsic constructivist learning. So my question was, could that not be duplicated in all the classes? So then what is the purpose of having a policy? Is what you're seeing nature or nurture? Is what a kid getting in that gifted class actually a manifestation of some natural cognitive gift that kid has, or more engaging instruction, more engaging activities, better pedagogy, more student-centered opportunities? So a book I'd recommend to the board and to the district and gifted parents of so-called gifted kids, because Joseph Renzulli would disagree that giftedness is a thing. Giftedness is a paradigm. It means that every human being has a gift, and a person learns best when you identify that gift and you center their learning activities around that gift. So if you're really gifted in art, wouldn't it make sense, as I instruct you in art, to utilize your understanding of art to teach you math, science? Could you relate art to literature? Could you relate art to history? So it's not that because your gift is in kinesthetic movement, hers is in art, that you're more gifted. Your gifts are just different. So Renzulli's model is to identify the gift of each kid and then set up a gifted pedagogical model to bring out the best in all kids. It was never meant to be an identify and isolate. But in the politics of privilege, wouldn't it look better if my kid's in the GATE program and your kid's not? And what I advised the board at in 2021 is don't fall into lobbying that advises you to maintain a discriminatory policy because you're afraid or there's apprehension about the influence of a certain influential lobby group. Now, I don't want to discount parents who lobby, but the message should be, thank you for your input, but I can't prevent another person's child from an opportunity because you want your child to be exclusive. The same type of gifted opportunities your kid gets, we want to expand to all so that every kid can have that opportunity. There's some boards who've done that to great resolve. Montgomery County in Maryland is one of them. They took a stance to their benefits. A book I recommend to you, a couple. One is by Dr. Yvette Jackson called The Pedagogy of Confidence. And the other is Brian Butler in a book called Every Child Deserves a Gifted Education. The gifted and talented is not a state, it's a methodology. And every child has a gift. What I haven't seen yet with audit are universally a policy challenge at that level that might open up the floodgates for more kids getting more opportunities. And one I will point out as I move to the next piece. At Novato High, I did in their audit find that they had an open AP enrollment policy. But as we looked at their data, we didn't see more representation equitably in their AP courses. So that wasn't that was a good policy. But what I advise them to do is then try to create some sort of protocol that would intentionally encourage more kids of color, kids of poverty, English learners, special ed kids to take advantage of it. So I want you to be fooled that just because you change the policy, everything's going to change. But policy change is a good first step. And I will say that your PBE initiative is a good policy change, but I know you're working to have it reflect the report card and other things, and I don't know if you're there yet, but you're moving in that direction. Any questions about policy? All right, let's go to the last one. Using the equity tools you already have. And this is one that I see promise, and there's already been some addition by subtraction. Some of the things you already had an ethnic studies curriculum, competency-based education and grading, restorative justice. Some of them have kind of died a natural death because of economics. You did have a TOSA at the district level for restorative justice, but that position was cut. So that was hard to expand that because that position was cut. But it's still available to staffs if they want to use it. But I wanted to kind of focus in the time I have left on the PBE and your data cycles. One of my dominant recommendations in all the audits is that when you really get down into equity, it's student by student, target by target, standard by standard. So if you all are students of mine, you have diverse character. We have male, we got female, we got different ethnicities, different ages. If I have a target that I want you to reach academically, and my team works with me to monitor the progress of each one of you, do you think that's going to mitigate or reduce equity issues? If I monitor each one of your progress, regardless of your race, your gender, your sexual orientation. So the real equity work is really the work you're doing in your data cycles. My concern is your data cycles are too infrequent. From the evidence I've gathered is 6 to 8 weeks. All the research on that says that that's too late. If I'm monitoring essential, guaranteed and viable targets for kids, and the teachers don't get a chance to communicate on that for 6 to 8 weeks, that's kind of like closing the gate after the horse is already gone. So if I teach Dr. Smith, let's say order of operation, which is definitely an essential in math. I'm working across schools. We unpack it. We're teaching it. We don't get together for 6 to 8 more weeks to review the data, to look at who's struggling, who's not. We moved on to 4 new standards since then. Then you got to build infrastructure to backtrack to go all the way back there. Now I'm challenging you. The research on collaborative teams, and what we call it PLC at work, you're calling it a data cycle. Probably should be doing it weekly. And teachers need to do it really well about an hour a week. Yours are getting one Wednesday a month. And it's across the district. So if you're looking at something to move to the next level, and I don't want to like rub it in anybody's face, but in Singapore, they get 9 hours a week. 5 hours a week in collaborative teams. So I'm not telling you to find 9 hours. But if you want to do something, now the schools in your district that are deeply engaged in it, they are working really hard and they're doing the best they can with the time they have. I could only imagine what they could do if they got an hour a week. So I'm encouraging the board, the central office, and the union to sit down. And I'm encouraging it not to be a power struggle over who can set the agenda, who can't, because both lose with power struggles. So I advise labor organizations, just sit down and cooperate, because the board can play power games too. Now you got this battle of ego as opposed to what's best for kids. So if you carve out that hour, sit down and organize what it should look like. I do not advise you to give teachers an hour a week and you have no input on what that hour a week is used for. It's a waste of resources. It becomes free for all. This work that the teams are doing that are really being effective in your district needs to happen at scale. And it's very specific. Guaranteed and viable curriculum. What do we want every student to know and be able to do in this upcoming unit in third grade math? Develop assessments, interim assessments. How are we going to gather evidence on kids' progress? We need time to analyze that data to figure out who needs support at a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3 level, and who's ready for extensions. At a minimum, a team needs an hour a week on that specific work to get really good at it. And right now, your teachers don't have that time. And the ones who are doing it well are making lemonade out of lemons. They're doing the best they can with what they have, but they could benefit from much more. So in using the tools you already have, my recommendation is to double down on that tool. Pour resources in it, monitor it, bring it to scale. And the schools that are doing it, what they have, they are doing a phenomenal job, and you can see it in their evidence. The schools that aren't, they don't have the time, they don't know how, but if I'm a superintendent, that's something I'm monitoring. If you can have schools engage in a powerful data cycle on a weekly basis, at a minimum, bare minimum bi-weekly, I think you do a whole lot academically to close your gaps, because you're monitoring student by student, essential by essential, course by course, unit by unit. 6 to 8 weeks is a long time. It's a good start. I'm not criticizing what you have. It's a good start. But to make the progress you say you want to make, it has to be more frequent than that. So that's my summary. And I know Dr. Smith wanted to add her. Yeah. But anybody, we want to take questions first from the board and from.
Questions from the board? Lametta and then Trustee Pickus, please.
When you talk about data and making sure that teachers and staff get more hours to do this, do you know what district is very successful at providing that those hours and actually seeing the numbers change
Great
and
question.
increase in math?
Yep.
Just to get an idea of how long it took, right? Because change doesn't happen overnight. So that's my number one question. And then comment, going back to resources. Mm-hmm. In 2022, I listened to Nice White Parents. Mm-hmm. And it's just a really great podcast of the similarities that happen here in other parts of the country. So I think we all get to the heart of the issue,
Yeah.
where we're not taking from one student, but it's like, how do we make it equitable, going back to our topic this
Yeah.
evening?
Because you're a public institution. And part of what makes democratic systems work is that you serve the public with a level of integrity. That if the law is applied from a police officer to you because you're rich and different because you're poor, we think that's unfair. Well, you're a public institution. And the rule of law and equity should be there. Now, private, you do whatever you want to do. You signed up for that. But public, there's a democratic expectation in the public. But people try to manipulate that to get advantages, and that's called in political science corruption. To push a public system to give me an advantage over others, that's the standard definition of corruption. So you got to be careful of that. And nice can sometimes be a manipulative tool to get what I want from you. Go to the first question. A website I'd recommend is www.allthingsplc.info. Those are model schools in what you call your data cycle, we call PLC at work. There's a site finder, we have about 600 model schools. There's a map, and you can take the cursor and put it over the map, and it'll show you schools or districts that are closest to you. The one I'd recommend if you really want to go deep is Sanger USD, which is closer to Fresno. High Title I, high transiency, high ELL, a district full of National Blue Ribbon schools through this process. Sanger USD. Phenomenal. Knocking it out of the park. Their former superintendent, Mark Johnson, was a National Superintendent of the Year like 6 years ago. They got this integrated into every fabric. It's even integrated into the principal's evaluation. Are your team strong? Do you have protocols for identifying essential learning outcomes? They got to bring that evidence to their supervisor as a part of their evaluation as administrators. What's your intervention protocol? How's it working? They're expected as instructional leaders to monitor all of that. And that's where their focus is. Sanger USD, tell them I sent you. All right? All right? You're welcome.
That was one of my questions as well. And I'm kind of, I like your frame when you were talking about reimagining professional development and how we have to be creative. I think, you talked when you were here last year about initiative fatigue and about staff feeling tired because I think we know so much more than we did even 5 years ago in education around what we need to be doing and how we need to be serving our students. And there's so many things we need to learn and do. And when we talk about building this time into our schedule so that staff can collaborate, I think staff have so many other needs in addition to these needs. And so it's a matter of kind of balancing all of those pieces.
And prioritizing.
Right. And I think sometimes immediate needs might take precedence in a teacher's mind over a data cycle, right? And so it's a matter of balancing all those things. But I think at the heart of kind of some things that you talked about, which is that, teachers and our staff really want to do right by their students. And I think, when you talked about our ELD students, right? Teachers want to do well, but don't necessarily have the tools. And there are so many tools out there to use, and how do we have the time to learn all of the tools? And so I think, I don't obviously have the answer, but framing this for our teachers in a way that this is not another thing to do, but how can this be a tool that is valuable? I think teachers want to be serving these students, and the question is, how do we get creative in a way to make that happen? I mean, I'd love 9 more weeks and 9 more hours in our week to do this work, right? We just don't have that. So how can we be creative and get teachers invested in this kind of conversation so that this feels not like another initiative, but it feels valuable because teachers can see how it's working. And, sometimes new initiatives feel clunky and it feels exhaustive and we don't see results. And so I think just the creativity and building on, what teachers already want, which is really to do this kind of work well.
Part of respond is is we know if learning is your focus, if student growth and development, certain strategies and practices that are more effective than others. What you want to do is spend more time doing those and less time doing the things that don't bring that. So I would advise leaders and leadership teams to do an assessment of what are teachers spending their time on. If you have kids who don't speak English and you're responsible for it, what's so important that you're doing, what's taking up your time, that actually meeting your most dominant need seems like something extra or one more thing to do? That's why my first recommendation was to be data-driven, so we could show teachers with real, solid, transparent evidence our English learners have not progressed at the rate of others over the last 5 years. This is not another thing to do. Our evidence has shown this is our main thing. And then give them time and opportunity to focus on that main thing. Initiative fatigue happens when we choose a few of our favorite things because somebody just gets inspired. I went to a conference and learned about project-based instruction. Well, project-based instruction might not be our most prevalent issue. Now it seems like an ad. But if my kids are bouncing off the wall, I don't know what to do. Some support on classroom management sounds really timely right now. So professional development should be attached to the teacher's greatest needs. So they see in it, you shouldn't have to get buy-in or sell it. Let your evidence guide you. And if you show a person that our English learners are really, really suffering and we got to focus on it, I don't have time, then my question is, what do you have time for? If this is our dominant issue, but I don't have time to deal with our dominant issue because we're going to talk about gum policy or hats or playground behavior, that's not our main thing. So if the data-driven piece is taken really seriously, it naturally leads into the learning that teachers need to get there. Now you have alignment between sense of urgency and professional development. I get it when it's just a few of my favorite things. It just doesn't seem relevant. But your data should guide you in what's most relevant, campus by campus and district-wide.
I hear that. I want to push back on that a little bit. If I have to do lesson plans for my lesson, I'm teaching a new course, that's going to be very timely. And if I have 3 EL students, that's also very important. So I don't want to say that it's just what I feel like doing at the moment, right? I think there are multiple needs that are very important at one time.
So do a needs assessment and take a look at how you're spending your time. And what are we doing in the day that isn't related to our bottom line of what's most important? Obviously, lesson planning is important. But wouldn't the quality of the lesson I teach and the pedagogy I use almost be more important than the lesson that I plan?
For sure. I hear your point, and my point is just that teachers and staff have multiple priorities that are all very important, and they compete for our limited time.
So my question is, what are your most important priorities?
I think if you have a large class of students and you have 4 different subgroups in that class. I mean, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying there are multiple needs that need to be addressed at one time. And I think a creative approach, I think an assessment of how teachers spend their time is really interesting. If teachers are spending their time with new courses, collaborating around lesson plans, right? Maybe there's an area where the district could provide extra support or sharing of resources to open up other time for these other focus points.
Absolutely.
So I think to your point, assessing how we are using the time that we have, I think is very important. And then just encouraging teachers to access the resources that they need to do this kind of work, which I think they want to do.
Absolutely. And just real quick, I don't know if you've ever seen Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits. He talks about put first things first. He has this visual where he has this container and some boulders and some pebbles. And he pours the pebbles in there first, and then he tries to stick the boulder and it won't fit. If we put the boulder in first and make the pebbles fit around, they all fit. So the only point I was making is that there's 1,000 things that teachers do a day. But I would never want the reason to not address the most important thing is because I'm focused on all these pebbles, but I'm missing the boulder. So that's why I asked as a school and the board to determine what are your biggest priorities and then build that in first and build everything else around it. That's my point. Don't get so caught up in pebbles that you can't deal with the boulder. And student learning and equitable learning has to be your biggest boulder. That's what the state assesses you on. Our kids demonstrating mastery of essential standards that they assess every year, grade 3 through 8, and once during high school. So, yeah, so wasn't trying to undermine or demean the other priorities teachers have, but you only got 8 hours in a day. What can we fit? But don't make your top priority secondary, make those primary.
Thank you very much for being here. It's it's wonderful. I feel like I've gone back in time too, because when you brought up all the COVID, and I thought, oh my gosh, we really have come so far.
Seems like 20 years, doesn't it?
Well, I was like, oh my gosh, that was just, and how things shift even since then, and the reminder that how unique Novato really is. So I just had a couple, not in any particular order, a couple of things as I was thinking through everything and processing. One of the items I've spoken to it a couple of times, the professional development. And I know that, as you mentioned, we've had changes in our contract. And I know that there has been continual support, though, around having it available or, compensation for teachers that want to go to certain programs. We even spoke, and I just want to, here in a public forum talk about having links or resources to all the things. I'm sure teachers know where they can get, MCOE has trainings or whatever, but making it as easy as possible. But also, I think we've done in the past, and I would imagine continuing, that when we do have those open windows of PD time, that there's different things that they can choose. That was a shift that came, I think, several years ago, that instead of saying you need to attend this when it may not apply to you,
Yeah.
we have X, Y, and Z. And, I think our staff's been pretty good about reaching out and asking what kind of training do you want. So just, hoping that we, continue that despite the lessening of resources
A
available.
recommendation I have, and got your name, we worked together last year. Yes. Catherine. I recommended to her school a tool called Avanti, which is actually an on-demand video tool that has lots of instructional strategies that teaches in 15, 20-minute bites.
Oh, perfect.
That is on demand. So let's say a team wants to figure out a strategy to help disengage learners. It's cheaper than hiring somebody. It's actually pretty inexpensive. They have like 1,500 different, these are videos by teachers. Well, they can access it and do it right in there. That's the kind of creativity I'm talking about. They can have on-demand tools. With technology, there's no reason that everything has to be a sit-down at a PD day in an auditorium. There's so many on-demand streaming opportunities. It's called Avanti. I'd recommend you check it out. It's a really good tool.
Well, what strikes me is you had said something earlier. I think that, you might come upon a situation that might be different, that there's, you can't wait 3 weeks for the train or whatever. And so having different things available, I think, is great. And I think that we've worked towards that. One of the other items that you talked about was the team report on tangible, data-driven equity goals at least 2 times per year. And I'm sort of wondering, we do a little bit in the LCAP talking about things, but I'm wondering if that's something we can incorporate when the schools present, or there's a touch point. I think that that's completely tangible, and from my perspective, something that we should be able to do, and I think is very practical and helpful. And the last thing, I think you kind of answered it through the questions here. The statement on page 3 about others still view data literacy and equity as initiatives from the district as opposed to their moral and professional imperative. And I think it was sort of, I align that with the, initiative fatigue. And I feel like hopefully we've, at least over the last 3 years, had a little more consistency, and that I, even as a parent, don't feel so much of that, because it kind of bleeds out into the families and stuff, like, teachers don't really want to do this because it's something else that we're supposed to do, and we're gonna, it's gonna be something new next month or whatever. And so I felt a little bit better about that. But
Yeah.
one of the things that struck me while you were speaking is that some sites were really going and embracing it and some weren't. And so I was just curious if there was like a general theme on what it was. And I think you might have said the leadership at the site, but if there's some kind of tool that we can incorporate or, I don't know, I just have what tools.
Great
was what-
question. Kind of, I'm uncomfortable calling it an indisputable correlate, but I'd have to gather more data. Where the data coach, is that what you call them? The data specialist was very involved in gathering evidence in connection with the team. There tended to be a stronger focus on student by student. So that could be a very high leverage position that could really accelerate at campuses who are kind of confused about what to do. Where the data specialist was a big part of the dialogue with the leadership team, there was a pretty easy correlation to they were getting more into student by student, target by target, looking for anomalies and issues in the data. That I found when that person's really good in that position, that makes a really big difference. And that's been my experience across the district. So if you're looking for a leverage point to accelerate it across the district, perhaps do some analysis of how the data specialists, how they're operating, and even have them share with other data specialists. Let's say I'm struggling. Maybe I go visit the data specialists at this school to see how they're doing it. I've saw really good use of Google Docs and other online virtual tools. I mean, I've seen some really impressive stuff. And in some places, not as much, not because I think they might not know how. So that tended to be a really strong indicator. If the data specialist was really engaged and proficient at the actual use of data, they tended to be much more proficient at it. Or the principal took over, because the principal, but somebody was really literate in the use of data, that tended to be a pretty strong predictor.
You touched briefly on PBE, and we've been working for a long time on that, but have kind of stalled a bit at the grading portion. Do you have any insights on that would be useful?
Is to focus less on the grading and focus on the performance and proficiency. A grade is like you get on a scale. It's just what the scale tells you. I mean, you weigh what you weigh. A C is a C. A B is it's the work you do to get to the scale. So you never want grades to disengage kids from the improvement process. Grades are more for us. In a perfect world, I wish we can get rid of grades. Adlai Stevenson High School in Illinois, who's rated the top high school in America for the last 6 years, has a totally performance-based grading system. They don't give letter grades. It's all based upon competency. And a lot of high schools and secondaries balk at that because of communication with parents. Parents want grades. If you're looking for some insight on ways you can still use grades but not discourage kids, check out Tom Schimmer, SCHIMMER. It's called Grading from the Inside Out, and he shows how you can still use grades. Grades are okay until it discourages a kid from trying. Just use that as a principle. I like to consider feedback like a comma and a grade like a period. The more commas you have, the better. But once you put that period, it means it's over. So if grades make kids think that a comma is a period, then it's bad. So if I'm in the process, I'm getting my feedback, and I get a grade for the first quarter and it's a D, and I can never recover, then what's my motivation to go back and fix the deficiencies I have? Because you put a period where a comma should be. I was explaining to folks earlier, At my former school, we used a similar model, but grades were not final until the last day of school. A kid had all the way until, we never used a period till you went home for the summer. So if there's a standard you struggle with in first quarter, as you're getting ongoing support, you can go back to your teacher all the way until the last day of school with evidence that you got it, and your grade could change. So if I had my choice, we wouldn't use grades at all.
Well, we've worked through
But if
using a number system versus
Yeah.
a letter system, which is
Yeah.
the PBU model. So,
But if you use it,
yeah.
But
Tom Schimmer, I would recommend his book, because don't let the communication tool, which is all the grade is,
Yes.
discourage kids from trying. Because isn't part of your mission lifelong learning? Isn't failing a part of trying? Isn't grit and resilience? You never want a grade to make a kid give up. That's just my only point.
just wanted to, I like that analogy about the comma and the period, because it'll stick with me. I do think, and I understand the point of waiting till the end of the year, but I've noticed that my kids will come home and they have the opportunity to still turn papers in. I mean, it used to be really regimented, and it's really, because I catch this because I'm so much like, you have to do stuff by a certain date. What do you mean this was due yesterday? You can still turn it in. So I think we've built in a lot of flexibility, not through to the end of the school year, but I'm seeing that a lot more. Or, this test, you have an opportunity to recover and try again. And so I've seen a lot of, again, against how I grew up, and I'm thinking, oh, no, that test is what it is. So I'm seeing that that's had a positive impact on kids as well, especially some of my daughter's friends who don't do well. It's like, okay, well, I need to do a little bit better and not feel like that score that they got on that test is going to mar them for the rest of the semester or whatever. And so I think in that way we've had some positive changes and things. Again, I understand the difference with the end, but I see it
But want to
moving.
validate some of the things you said. There's a difference between proficiency and responsibility. Missing a deadline has nothing to do with proficiency. That's a responsibility principle. Proficiency is the task the kid was given, can the kid do it? So can there be interventions that work on responsibility? That's a different skill. I want kids to be responsible. It's not a good idea to miss deadlines and then rush at the last minute. That has nothing to do with proficiency. That's a responsibility and timeliness task. That kid wouldn't need, if he knows, let's just say I'm lazy. I know it, I just don't care to do it on time. Now your protocol is making me irresponsible. So if I don't turn it on time, don't give me an F. Put me in some support that helps me work on being more responsible. Because the issue may be that I understand Pythagorean theorem, I'm just lazy. That's not proficiency. That's responsibility. So in your assessment protocol, separate the two. Give a kid an evaluation on responsibility and an evaluation on proficiency. Those are two separate things. The problem with grades is they're so unsophisticated, they mesh them together. Those are two totally separate issues. So I work with Ellen, and I might know my stuff, but if I'm always late, that's not part of my. Yeah, but that has nothing to do with my proficiency. I need to work on being more responsible and timely. That's a good standard. That's a good thing too. So don't think proficiency-based education is just given these like forever deadlines and kids just keep kicking the can down the road. Proficiency is, do they have the skill? But that doesn't preclude you from addressing issues of maturity, responsibility, timeliness, deadlines. Those things are important too, but they're two totally different things. The problem with traditional grading is we weaponize them and put them together. Separate them. It's not good that a kid thinks that I can wait to end of the semester to turn everything in. Then that's not about learning, that's about compliance with requirements. That doesn't mean I know Pythagorean theorem. That's proficiency. So just wanted to validate what you said, that's not like old school. Being responsible and timely is a great thing. And PBE shouldn't undermine that. PBE is about the proficiency on the standard. But that doesn't mean you still can't teach a kid and support them on maturity, timeliness, and responsibility. Wouldn't you want your kid to have both? But don't weaponize the grade by giving him an F for being untimely, but he knows the content. That's a different evaluation. Yes. So you see why teachers need at least an hour a week to work out these things? These are pretty deep professional issues, and they need time to wrap their minds around it.
So Dr. Muhammad, I just wanted to appreciate your time in our district. I wish I would have been here the whole time. And thank you so much for bringing your expertise. Tell us the name of your new book.
It's called The Way Forward.
The Way Forward. All right.
And it's
I kind of was expecting a copy when you came, but
now here's the problem. I was traveling from Mexico and I did, but I will send one to you. U.S. mail still works.
okay.
I'll send you a few.
I can buy my own, but thank you. I was just teasing you. But I am looking forward to it. And we had a wonderful presentation last night from our data specialists who are, it's now been revamped and they'll continue to be teacher on special assignments. But I think that the principal team advocated for maintaining those positions for the future because of the same value that you see. And what they showed us last night was how much they have grown as professionals in feeding the data, understanding the data, helping teachers understand their data in their classroom, and using it to propel changes in the classroom that create better outcomes for students. So we are excited to build on all the things we've learned from you, including cycles of improvement, of inquiry. Really, I think you gave us a presentation in December that went like this, and like all the basics. I was like, okay, we got to do all these things. I think we were all a little overwhelmed, but from there we are designing our LCAP, and we're focusing on building site leadership and teacher leadership capacity to build ILTs, and those cycles. We have someone who actually worked with Tom Maney, who is going to be helping us. She's a current principal, and she's coming to support and coach our sites on some of the systems and protocols that you can use, so that we're talking about data in every meeting, and how we as leaders can lead by example. So that's the other piece. And then we have our equity imperative that you referred to that was written in 2018. And we are going to get kind of a district equity team together, including parents, to redesign that into more of an action plan, so that it has outcomes and goals that we can report back to the board on, and to say, okay, these are the things that we have identified through our work with Dr. Muhammad to say, this is where we want to move forward. So just wanted you to know that you had a tremendous influence on us, even though you only see us like 6 days a year or whatever. But
Good.
and
Appreciate it.
yeah, so just wanted to be able to say that out loud so that the whole world knows. Okay.
And shout out to Dr. Derby, who's not here, who got it started. So, and you picked up the mantle and done a great job. So, and just that equity team, remember, equity is not an initiative. It's a lens, and it's an imperative that we look at every system to make sure that some kids are not marginalized compared to others, and that we're fair. I don't think you can do anything more American. We said in the Declaration of Independence that all human beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So all people are endowed with that. And public schools are a vehicle to deliver on that promise. So,
Thank you so much.
thank you. Get to get up tomorrow and do it all over again. All right. Yep. So thank you. I'm sitting. I didn't have any with me. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. You look like a student.